Hey everyone, and welcome back to another Vivarium build. Today we're going to be doing something a little different, and I feel like I say that just about every time, but it's true and it's kind of the theme of this channel. I like to show you guys a lot of options so that way you're not always stuck doing the same thing, and whenever you're making something you can really just dip into your toolbox and make something unique every time. That said, my friend Jefferey of Reptile Edge contacted me and he said, hey, I just released the Rept-Viv Pro and I want to send you one of these along with $75 if you set it up and make a video about it. And I was like, sure, I could definitely do that. Now that was the only stipulation that was made. He didn't tell me to endorse it. He didn't tell me to say all kinds of good stuff about it or what have you. Really, he just said set it up. So that's what I'm doing. Like I said, I'm not going to endorse the product or anything like that. I'll leave that up to you guys, but I will tell you my thoughts on it and give you a general rundown of what's going on with it. So when he sent me the $75, I came up with a pretty cool idea, and basically that was a challenge or budget build. It was, could I set up this entire vivarium for $75 or less? Now I will be upfront with you guys, I didn't include the microfauna in this cost and the lighting just because they're very variable. You could choose so many different things that I didn't think it was right to focus on one thing. And you know, with the lighting especially, maybe you need UVB, maybe you don't. It all depends on what you're trying to keep in the vivarium, but I will tell you guys what I got going on here. And really, I think that's about enough of an intro. Why don't we start building this thing and we'll see if I can pull it off.
To begin, we'll construct the terrarium. Jeffrey sent me the medium-sized Rept-Viv Pro, which is about the same size as a 10-gallon vertical vivarium. It retails for $59.99 US. This enclosure is constructed with extruded aluminum and acrylic. The thing that makes the Rept-Viv Pro unique is that it ships flat, meaning that it could ship anywhere without issue, but it will require assembly on the recipient's end. I won't explain much about constructing this since the directions explain it pretty well. However, I will say that I thought the overall process was fairly simple. After getting all of the pieces together, I removed the protective film from the acrylic. Normally, I wait till the end of the build to do this part, but for the sake of the video, I thought it made sense to remove it ahead of time. As is, this enclosure is not designed to hold water, so it will require additional work on our end. To get this addressed, I started sanding the aluminum slightly with some 60 grit sandpaper. Afterward, I taped off the tank using some painter's tape. Then, using some 100% silicone that's designed for use with plastics, I sealed the enclosure. From there, I smoothed the silicone bead with my finger and removed the tape. Since this is largely made with aluminum, I recommend concealing all of the aluminum with silicone so that it doesn't corrode from exposure to moisture. With the enclosure fully assembled, we'll move on to the setup. From here, I will begin keeping track of the budget and we'll see if I can set this thing up for $75 or less. That said, we'll start out with the background. What I have here are some cork tiles which retail for $11.99 at Hobby Lobby, but using a 40% off coupon I got the entire pack for $7.69. From here we'll open up the tiles and cut one down to the appropriate size. Next we'll attach it to the enclosure using some 100% silicone. This stuff retails at Home Depot for $5.21. This is the same silicone that I use for all of my builds, as it is completely safe to use with plants and animals. From there I applied a generous amount of silicone to the back side of the enclosure and set the cork tile in place. Next I ripped up another cork tile into irregular pieces. I layered up these pieces until I created a look that I was pleased with. After getting a nice arrangement, I went and siliconed all of these pieces in place. Finally, I put some weights on the cork to apply pressure while the silicone cured. 24 hours later, I moved on to the next step. From here, I grabbed 2 pieces of cork bark which I bought at a local reptile show for $15. Using some silicone, I attached the flat piece to the background like so. Next, I got a bag of pea pebbles from Home Depot for $3.78. For 50 pounds, you can't beat that price. The only thing is that this gravel needs thoroughly rinsed. To do so, I poured the gravel into a strainer and rinsed it off using a hose. Next, I got a bag of Royal Oak lumpwood charcoal. The brand doesn't matter so long as it's lumpwood charcoal, but this is the cheapest I could find. It was only $9.97 at Home Depot. From here, I poured a little dechlorinator into a bucket and then dumped in the charcoal. Afterward, I filled the bucket with some water and let the charcoal soak for about a half hour. Then I transferred the charcoal to a different container and broke it up into manageable pieces using a splitting maul. Now let's return to the enclosure. To make the false bottom, I simply put down a layer of pea pebbles. From there, I drilled a hole in the side of the enclosure. Then using a uni-seal and an airline flow valve, I created a drain. I didn't include this in the overall cost because there are many ways that you could do this with relatively no expense. Next, I measured the enclosure. Then I cut out a piece of knitting mesh slightly larger than the measurements I just took. This mesh is pretty fine, will work well for our purpose, and it only costs 99 cents at Hobby Lobby. If you're making a single, small vivarium like this, then it's a pretty good solution. However, if you're doing large builds or a lot of projects, then the mesh you normally see me use is a better and cheaper option. Plus, this stuff is rigid, so it's tough to work with. After trimming the mesh, I placed it into the enclosure and then topped it off with a layer of charcoal. Now we'll mix up the substrate. To start, I have a brick of cocoa husk that I got at a local reptile show for $4.49. Normally I use and recommend orchid bark for this component, but cocoa husk is a decent and cheaper alternative. Next, I have a brick of plantation soil, which is just a fancy name for cocoa fiber. I also got this at the same reptile show for $3.95. With both of these selected, I added some water and allowed them to expand. From here, I grabbed a bag of sphagnum moss for $3.97 at Home Depot. I then mixed this up with the cocoa fiber and cocoa husk. Next, I mixed in some charcoal and finally some sand that I got at Lowe's for $4.17. If you want to know how I'm mixing up the substrate, then follow the link. After getting the substrate all mixed up, I added an initial layer into the vivarium. After doing so, I broke another piece of cork tile into a few sections. Using these, I made a little barrier to help create additional depth in the vivarium. While doing so, I added more substrate as needed. Then I added the other piece of cork bark. Now we'll move on to the plants. One of my go-tos for getting cheap plants is to hit up the clearance rack at Lowe's. Lowe's specifically has a lot of sorry plants just begging to go to a loving home. With a little TLC, most plants can be brought back stronger than ever. In doing so, I found 2 Cryptanthus Pink Star, each for $1, 2 Ficus Pumila, each for $1 as well, a Syngonium Podophyllum Regina Red for $1, a Pilea Dark Mystery for 50 cents, and also these orchids, but I didn't end up using them for the build. To start, let's remove whatever existing dirt we can by hand. Afterward, your plants should be as close to bare root as possible. Next, we'll thoroughly wash off the plants with warm water. While doing so, make sure to remove any dirt from the roots and rinse the leaves as well as possible. Next, I sometimes like to give the plants a quick dunk in some dechlorinated water to remove any of the tap water that we just rinsed the plants with. Next, we'll replant the plants with some of that substrate that we just made, and we'll put them into quarantine. I did this for about a month prior to setting up the vivarium, which is my recommended minimum quarantine time. I like to simply use a Tupperware container to store my quarantine plants, but you could use various methods. After quarantine, the plants had perked up quite nicely and even grew a bit. During this time frame, I also found a Fittonia white vein on clearance for $5. So for only $10.50, I got all of the plants that you see here. That's a killer deal, and all that I had to do is give the plants a little love and put them in quarantine for a little bit. Now let's create some pins for the ficus. I'm going to use some paper clips covered in plastic. They will last long enough for the plants to become rooted onto the background, and then we can remove them later on. Using wire cutters, I cut sections of the paper clips and then bent them into little C shapes. From there, I removed the ficus from the planter and pinned them onto the background. Next, I removed the Syngonium podophyllum from its planter and planted it near the background. Then I repeated the same process for the Pilea, but this time I broke it up into a few separate plants and planted them throughout the vivarium. Next, I added the Cryptanthus pink star, and finally the Fittonia white vein. From there, it was time to add the leaf litter. Here I'm using some DIY leaf litter that I made myself. To make it, I simply went outside, gathered some choice leaves, and boiled them for about 15 minutes. Afterward, I let them dry and stored them away for future use. If you want to learn more about this process, be sure to follow the link. So, using these leaves, I created a nice layer on the bottom of the vivarium. Finally, I gave the enclosure a good spray down.
And I did it for just under $70. We definitely could have done this cheaper had I bought pre-made substrate and different things like that, but I always like to show you guys how to do things yourself from scratch, so that way you're not reliant on a business or anything like that. You only are relying on yourself, and that's definitely how I like to live my life, but you can do whatever you want. Typically I buy all of my materials in bulk, so that way my setups are actually much cheaper than, say, 70 bucks, because I'm only using a portion of a large amount of materials. So I may have only used like $10 worth of materials to set up an enclosure like this. And even in this case, I didn't use all of the materials that I bought, so I may have actually only spent like $40 because I have all of those extra materials now, but I'm just gonna we'll roll with the main cost just so that way you guys get an idea of the starting cost. I'm definitely sympathetic to the fact that a lot of you guys don't have a ton of money, that it may be your first build, you're just a kid. There are so many different scenarios as to why you want to spend or can't spend a lot of money on a vivarium, so I'd like to show you guys the option of making it pretty cheap, and this is a good example. Of course, I mentioned lighting early on in the video, so what I have here is just a standard shop light and a 60 watt equivalent LED ecosmart bulb. Now, if you're only trying to grow plants, this is definitely a good solution in my experience. I pretty much use it on most of, if not all of my enclosures, just to grow the plants, and it seems to work extremely well, and it's a pretty cheap solution too. I think collectively this is probably about $8. I'll leave the exact prices up on the screen, but definitely a cheap solution and it gets the job done. However, keep in mind, if you're going to house reptiles, you definitely want to include UVB, so if you're going to use this light, definitely use a UV light in conjunction with it. And finally, I'll give you my thoughts on the Rept-Viv Pro. Overall, I like it. I think it's a nice looking enclosure, and initially I didn't think I would like how the aluminum looks at all, but seeing it all set up with a vivarium in it, I actually think it is a pretty nice aesthetic. With that in mind, I can't really keep it next to my other enclosures because it doesn't fit in, but I'm alright having it over here by itself just to kind of be its own entity. The functionality of the door is pretty nice. I think it's nice and easy to open. Once it's locked, you know it's locked because of this little latch here, and it's easy to open, so that's a nice feature. One of the things that makes this enclosure unique, I think, is also one of its drawbacks, and that is the fact that you have to build it. Now, for some people like myself, I actually like building stuff, so it works for me, but if you don't feel like taking the time to build an enclosure, or you don't think you're going to do it right, something like that, it might not be the best solution for you simply because you're going to have to take the time to do that. However, I will say that once it's built, it's fairly sturdy, and all that you got to do is just seal it with the silicone so that way it doesn't leak. Something else that you may have noticed is that the plants withered slightly, and that's because I'm still kind of dialing in the humidity in here. They came from an extremely humid environment, and then they went to a not so humid environment. And the reason is that since this is like a fresh air screen top, I wasn't keeping the humidity that high, but I just put a little piece of plastic on here to retain the humidity nicely. And you can do that with your other enclosures as well, like Exoterra. It's a pretty easy way to make them hold humidity much better. And I think we'll stop there. To conclude, I want to thank Jeffrey for sending all of this stuff my way. It was definitely enjoyable to set up the Rept-Viv Pro, and I'm glad that you gave me the opportunity to do so. So thank you for sending me all of this stuff. And I left a link at the end of the video if you want to check out his YouTube channel. He does a lot of stuff with geckos and whatnot, so you can probably learn some information over there. And I also leave all the links down in the description if you want to check out his website, see what's going on with the Rept-Viv Pro, whatever. It's totally up to you guys. So, as always, I thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time. Peace.